Western country. And I have to say, again, digressing slightly, I get very annoyed about Prime Minister David Cameron going around the world lecturing to different countries about human rights abuses and democracy. I believe he's been recently lecturing the Chinese about this. Now, if I were the Chinese, I would tell him exactly where to stick his lecture on human rights. It is absolutely at the height of hypocrisy. He's got to start dealing with things in his own country. That obviously, just how it affected me, which was the original question, of course, when I got out 4 days later, I was told by the solicitors allocated to me that there were some journalists outside and I shouldn't really talk to them. Oh, journalists, because I had no contact with the outside world. I'm not allowed to make a phone call. I had nothing. The only person I was able to give was I was able to give the number of my daughter for the police to ring, but I had no idea if anybody knew or cared or anything else. Not a clue. But of course, once I got out, I learned what had happened, and apparently the station had been bombarded with calls from all over the world.
That's included.
Including you. Thank you very much,
many
Mel.
times.
I believe that there were over 4 days, there were 1,500 calls came in to the police station in Aberdeen asking about my whereabouts. And I had the dubious honour of having a tape specially made for me by Grampian Police because I got sick of answering the phone. I was arrested once again, actually. It wasn't the only time. You'd have thought that perhaps the Scottish authorities might have thought, well, we've opened it, there's a hornet's nest here, we'd have been better not arresting this green character in the first place if this was going to happen, because it was all over the internet and everything like that. And people suddenly realised the Scottish government were in serious trouble over this. You know, it doesn't matter what anybody says, to go to those lengths to shut somebody up means, I think, in any intelligent person, that the person who's doing that has got something to hide. So we campaigned further, and just to cut a long story short, I was arrested again in Warrington, my hometown, on the 14th of April, when I was going to sign in for the bail conditions that had been imposed upon me as a result of my arrest in February. And one day, it was again running up to the general election, I have to say, general election was the 6th of May, I was ready to roll. Despite the fact that I was the only person in parliamentary history, in British parliamentary history, to denied both the opportunity of entering the constituency for which he wanted to stand, nor to address those constituents with the particular issue that I wanted to put before them. Never happened in British history before. But there I was, still the mainstream media weren't terribly interested in. I thought it was fairly momentous, really, whatever the cause. But no, Hollie Greig, nobody must talk about Hollie Greig. That's the end of the line if anybody talks about Hollie Greig. But anyway, I just wanted to sign, and a couple of officers from Grampian Police sort of pounced on me again. They were very well-behaved and very courteous officers. I would have no complaint about these particular officers. But they took me in handcuffs, 6-hour drive up to Aberdeen, and I was accused of breaching my bail conditions there. The following day, again, an absolutely deluge of phone calls once they realised that I'd been picked up again, and the following day I was let out again. And I owe that really, I think, to the people who were prepared to phone in, because I think what they wanted to do was to prevent me from completing my final papers for the general election, because if they were holding me in prison, I believe that their intention was to hold me until after the 6th of May, when they could let me out again. But I think all the pressure from all the wonderful, loyal people who really cared about this case got me out, and I was able to complete my paperwork, and I was able to stand, although again I was not able to enter the city or talk about the case in any way. But there's some very loyal people in the area who carried the torch for me there and did the very best to get the story out. Absolutely. But that was it. Obviously, there is the ever-present threat of police action against me. They certainly don't like what I'm doing, and I think they would like to put me behind bars for a very long time if they possibly could. I do hope that by now people are convinced how serious this situation is. We've exposed the Lord Advocate over a conduct. We've also got other documents that are very important. If I may just go back in time again. After Hollie had given all the names of the assailants to the police in Aberdeen, a few days later, 11 days later, a knock came at the door of the little flat that Hollie lived in with her mum, and a group of people sent by local social services from a local mental institution came in grabbed Anne, the mother, said they had a warrant to section her, dragged her out of her home in front of her screaming terrified daughter, pulled her pants down, injected her in the buttock in front of the whole neighbourhood and threw her into a van. Hollie was subsequently handed back to her abuser father by social services. So when I talk about a police state in Scotland, I'm being absolutely serious about this. It is a police state and has been a police state for quite some time. Anne very skillfully got herself out of prison. She keeps her wits about her. She's a smart lady, no question about that. And as soon as she got out from the mental institution, she went straight to a solicitor. Solicitor got her in touch with an eminent psychiatrist called Dr. Margaret Smith. Dr. Smith gave Anne a full examination. He said that she couldn't find any reason at all why she should have been put in a warrant issued against her. Subsequently, the solicitor then wrote to the Scottish Welfare Commission, who are responsible for all of the actions. The buck stops with them, and said, could we have a look at the warrant that was supposed to be issued for Mrs. Mackey, as she was then, to be sectioned. And the Scottish Welfare Commission, in a letter that I have in my possession, dated the 1st of November 2000, said they couldn't find any documentation whatsoever to do with the case.
Incredible.
A kidnapping and an assault. But this indicates the lengths that the authorities will go to actually prevent this case coming into the public domain. They would have given Hollie back to be sexually abused by her father again and had the mother committed to a mental institution to shut them up. This is what we're talking about. It sounds like Nazi Germany, it sounds like Stalinist Soviet Union, doesn't it? But it's right here in Scotland. And this is part of an area that Mr. Cameron is going around the world lecturing other people on how their countries should behave. It's a disgrace. And Mr. Cameron, you know about this, and you should do the honourable thing and call for a public, independent and open, full investigation into the Hollie Greig case and the other issues emanating from it, including the kidnap and assault on Anne Greig, and also on what we believe to be the murder of Robert David Greig.
Right. Obviously, they're trying to cover this up.
Yes.
Right. For what reason? What is the actual pinnacle behind this?
Well, I don't know how far it will go. What I do know is that the Scottish Government will fall if this come out. And not only will the Scottish Government fall, when the people of Scotland know about the basis to this case and what has been covered up and why it's been covered up, I have to say, we're peaceful people, we're not suggesting any violence or ever, but I would be very doubtful if the First Minister of Scotland and the Minister of Justice and other members of the current Scottish Cabinet will feel safe walking the streets of Scotland again when people learn what they have covered up and what they've tried to protect and what they've tried to perpetrate, because it's not historic crimes, it goes beyond that. They are protecting the perpetrators who are still out there in Aberdeen. So this is as far as it goes. They're actively supporting rape and torture of Scottish children. I'm not exaggerating. I don't think that's the only conclusion that one could draw.
Yeah.
You know?
Without a doubt. It's rather sad that the people who claim to protect us can't protect us because they are in fact the problem.
They are the problem. Very much so. Very much so. I'm sad that none of the other people in Scotland in positions of authority have had the courage to come forward on this. I'm talking about the mainstream media to a large extent, but I'm also talking about the elected representative. Everybody in Scotland knows about this case. It's talked about widely, but no one will do anything about it, including the public's elected representatives. The story we get all the time is that when many of the concerned people approach various people from MPs, MSPs and all the rest of it, their stock answer is, oh, it's not my constituency, as if that prevented them from actually dealing with the horrific humanitarian situation that has occurred here. Terrible atrocities. I don't represent Aberdeen South, so why should I care about Scottish children being raped and abused? That's what they're saying. You can't have it any other way. They're all terrified to speak out. And you do wonder where it's going to end up if it comes out. There's such a enormous attempt to shut everything up over the Hollie Greig case. I said the government will fall on this, there's no question about it. We've got rid of the Lord Advocate. We've also got rid of the current Procurator Fiscal in Aberdeen, who launched the Crown attack on me by having arrested. He's gone as well now. So where does it end? I really don't know. But there's some very, very frightened people in the establishment in Scotland, and they have every reason to be frightened. Now, of course, one of the crucial facts, I'll just go back again about all the irregularities, is that Hollie received a payment of £13,500 public funds from the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. But according to the officials, because Hollie's evidence was not considered credible, reliable enough, and there was an insufficiency of evidence, no crime had ever been committed. So no one had ever actually come across someone who's been given public money as a victim of a crime that never existed. I mean, you can be, compensation rightly is paid to people who are perhaps victims of a crime where perhaps they can't be prosecuted, or perhaps in cases, perhaps sexual abuses where the victim doesn't know the offender and the offender's never caught, but they're satisfied that a crime has been committed. All those things can come about, of course. But in this case, there was no crime. So how did Hollie get her money? No one's been able to answer that one yet. So there are all sorts of very, very complex issues relating to this case in many ways, and of course the authorities cannot possibly answer them at all.
A little bit about the link to Madeleine McCann. I briefly spoke to you when
Yes.
on the radio show about it. Could you please talk a bit about that for us?
Yes, I will. And now, this is something that isn't very conclusive, so I'm only really just telling you things as they are. I have no proof to support anything one way or another. What I can say is that, what happened, obviously, is a very serious matter. So, in the case of Madeleine McCann, because the father of Hollie was never charged, no criminal records against him, and he fled to Portugal, when Madeleine McCann went missing on the 3rd of May 2007, I think it is now, I think it's 2007, but on that particular few days afterwards, knowing that her husband and son lived in Portugal, spoke fluent Portuguese, and were apparently quite regular visitors to the Algarve, and along with the victim support officer, went to her local police station in Shrewsbury in Shropshire to say, look, I think there's something I have to tell you. This little girl has gone missing. My former husband and my son are known sexual paedophiles. They are paedophiles, very seriously. And I have to tell you, I have to give you their name and their address, because I think that they should be at least eliminated from the police's inquiries. You should know about this. And because there's no record of them, you wouldn't know, and the Portuguese police wouldn't know. So she told them. Anyway, that was it. Anne felt she'd done her duty, passed this on, assumed that the Portuguese police had perhaps made an investigation and her husband and son had got nothing to do with it. That is what she thought. However, when I became involved in the case, we talked about this again, and I thought I'd make one or two inquiries. So I phoned up the Madeleine McCann team, the investigating team at that time, and I raised my concerns with the officer who was dealing with this, the ex-police officer who was dealing with it, a man called Mr. Cowley. And Mr. Cowley did a little bit of investigating. He wasn't overly friendly with me. I don't think he really welcomed my call for some reason. But he looked into it, and I explained what had happened, and he did come back a few minutes after I'd discussed the matter with him about the worries that my client had about this. And he said, well, Mr. Green, I can tell you that that information was never passed by the British police to the Portuguese police. Nothing was ever told. They were not told that there was a serious sexual predator living in their country. So the father of Hollie Greig and her brother were never interviewed by the Portuguese police over the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. I understand that situation remains as it is to this day.
They were actually living in the area?
No, they were living in central Portugal, just close to a city called Coimbra, which is just outside Lisbon. But it's only about an hour and a half, an hour and 3/4 drive to the Algarve, which is nothing. So why on earth would they restrict themselves to somebody who lived on the Algarve? I don't know.
Yeah.
The 14th of April, when I was going to sign in for the bail conditions that had been imposed upon me as a result of my arrest in February. And one day, it was again running up to the general election, I have to say. General election was the 6th of May. I was ready to roll. Despite the fact that I was the only person in parliamentary history, in British parliamentary history, to denied both the opportunity of entering the constituency for which he wanted to stand, nor to address those constituents with the particular issue that I wanted to put before them. Never. There's a hornet's nest here. It would have been better not arresting this green character in the first place if this was going to happen, because it was all over the internet and everything like that. And people suddenly realised the Scottish government were in serious trouble over this. You know, it doesn't matter what anybody says. To go to those lengths to shut somebody up means, I think, in any intelligent person, that the person who's doing that has got something to hide. So we campaigned further, and just to cut a long story short, I was arrested again in Warrington, my hometown. On the station had been bombarded with calls from all over the world.
Us included.
Including you. Thank you very much,
many
Mel.
times.
Yeah. I believe there were over 4 days, there were 1,500 calls came in to the police station in Aberdeen asking about my whereabouts. And I had the dubious honour of having a tape specially made for me by Grampian Police, because I got sick of answering the phone about it. I was arrested once again, actually. It wasn't the only time. You'd have thought that perhaps the Scottish authorities might have thought, well, we've opened it. How it affected me, which was the original question, of course. When I got out 4 days later, I was told by the solicitors allocated to me that there were some journalists outside and I shouldn't really talk to them. Oh, journalists? Because I had no contact with the outside world, not allowed to make a phone call, I had nothing. The only person I was able to give was I was able to give the number of my daughter for the police to ring, but I had no idea if anybody knew or cared or anything else, not a clue. But of course, once I got out, I learned what had happened, and Western country, and I have to say again, digressing slightly, I get very annoyed about Prime Minister David Cameron going around the world lecturing to different countries about human rights abuses and democracy. I believe he's been recently lecturing the Chinese about this. Now, if I were the Chinese, I would tell him exactly where to stick his lecture on human rights. It is absolutely the height of hypocrisy. He's got to start dealing with things in his own country. That obviously